Right, we'll give everyone a moment to settle in, and then we'll begin. Kia koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai ki tēnei hui. Ko lana tōku ingoa, no Fulbright, aho. I'm Lana from Fulbright, New Zealand, and it is wonderful to have you with us for today's Good Works webinar. It is lovely to see so many Fulbright alumni with us today, alongside guests joining us from both sides of the Pacific. That feels especially fitting for a webinar about the lasting impact of international exchange, research, and collaboration. We are very pleased to welcome those of you who may be joining us for the first time through your interest in doctoral education, career development, and the future of PhD pathways. For those who may be new to Fulbright, Fulbright New Zealand is a part of the Global Fulbright Program, an international educational and cultural exchange program designed to foster mutual understanding, collaboration, and lasting connections between New Zealand and the United States. Fulbright has a remarkable global community where people stay connected and continue making an impact long after their exchange experience. Our Good Works webinar series is one of the ways we highlight the inspiring work of our alumni. Well, today's webinar is a wonderful example of that spirit of exchange in action. We are delighted to welcome Professor Rachel Spronken-Smith. Rachel is a professor in higher education and geography and Deputy Dean of the Graduate Research School at the University of Otago. Rachel was a Fulbright scholar in 2018, spending time at the U.S. Council of Graduate Schools in Washington, D.C., and at the University of California, Berkeley. Her research focuses on doctoral education, outcomes, and researcher development. She'll be sharing insights from her Fulbright research on PhD graduates' career readiness and the practical outcomes that followed. Before we begin, I'd also like to mention that Fulbright New Zealand Awards are currently open for applications for New Zealanders. And Rachel's experience is a wonderful example of how Fulbright exchange can lead not only to valuable research insights, but also to international collaboration, professional networks, and long-term impact. We are very pleased to have Rachel with us today, and we look forward to hearing her reflections and insights. Rachel, over to you.
Kia ora. Thank you, Lana, for that lovely introduction. And I'm just going, if you stop sharing your screen, I'll just switch to my screen to share. And it's great to see so many people here.
Just a second.
Okay. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen now. Is that all right, Lana? Coming through all right? Yeah. Great. So called Rachel Spronken-Smith Tākewingoa, and as Lana said, I'm the Deputy Dean of the Graduate Research School. And it's a real privilege and pleasure to be here, reflecting on my time as a Fulbright scholar and the impact that it's had, which at the time didn't seem, well, it was a terrific experience, don't get me wrong, but at the time I thought, well, my research hasn't had much impact. But actually it turns out that over time it probably has. So in terms of getting us going, I'm just going to settle us into this virtual space with karakia. Mori aho, mori tu, mori ora, kia tātou, haumi e, hui e, taiki e. So this is just bringing us together in this virtual space across the oceans, which is terrific. In terms of what I'm going to cover today, firstly, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the motivation for the Fulbright Award and how I spent my time away. Then I'll go into the main research that I did while I was in the US, and that was around the career preparedness of PhD graduates. So I'll go through various aspects of that. We'll pause after that for some questions, and then we'll continue with looking at some of the research impact. So what are some of the outcomes from this research? Certainly when I finished my Fulbright, I think I had written a report for Fulbright and I had produced one paper for the centre that was hosting me. But aside from that, not many outputs, whereas now, many years later, there are much more outputs. And finally, I'll finish off just briefly reflecting on the Fulbright experience and really encouraging others to apply for this wonderful opportunity. So in terms of my motivation for Fulbright, really it was an opportunity to do some research. I wanted to do a comparative study between the US and New Zealand. We have very different doctoral education systems. So in the US, you would start with a couple of years coursework followed by thesis research, while here in New Zealand, it's really research-only degree. So people come in having done coursework through a master's or an honours degree, and by the time they get to us, they really are focusing for 3 to 4 years on the research. So quite different systems, but what about the outcomes? Are they similar? Secondly, I wanted to meet key researchers and organisations, and Lana mentioned that one of my visits was to the US Council of Graduate Research, so that was somebody I wanted to touch base with for sure. I was hoping to generate some new research collaborations, and of course, who doesn't like travelling to the US and seeing various parts of the country? So I actually did my doctoral study in Canada. So, and as part of that from British Columbia, I had actually done field work in parts of the US and travelled quite extensively, and I'd seen enough that I knew I definitely wanted to go back there. So how did I spend my time away? Initially started off with a brief holiday, about a week in New York. My husband came with me and our daughter, who was about to start university here. So we had that holiday and we arrived in January in the middle of a snowstorm. So that was kind of interesting, a good experience. And then we went to Washington, D.C., where I was visiting the US Council of Graduate Schools. Now, they were particularly instrumental in my research on career outcomes of PhDs because they have a long-standing program of following up on career outcomes from PhDs across the US. So I was really wanting to find out how they had designed their survey, what they'd done, and make sure that I wasn't going to cross over or interfere with their research, but rather complement it. Another research interest of mine at the time was around undergraduate research and inquiry. So I also took the opportunity to visit the US Council of Undergraduate Research. But most of my time was spent at UC Berkeley as a visiting scholar in the Centre for Studies in Higher Education. Now, that was kind of an interesting move because when I set on going to Berkeley for the visit, it was premised on a major research group led by Marisi Narad at the University of Washington, actually moving her group to Berkeley. So that was what was planned. So she has a big group looking at graduate education. Now, unfortunately, their move fell through so that when I went to Berkeley, they weren't there. But nevertheless, the centre there was very accommodating and there was a bunch of visiting scholars there. So I had a good time and a productive time there. And the Graduate Research School at Berkeley were also very accommodating. At the time of my visit, I was on leave from being Dean of our Graduate Research School here in Otago. So there were a lot of synergies around what we were trying to do in the doctoral education space. Okay, so I'm going to now dive into the study. And if any questions come up during this reporting about the study, please put them in chat and we can try and address them later on. So the overall aim was to determine the preparedness of PhD graduates for career transitions. And this was set amidst a background where the employment landscape is obviously changing. So with the massification of doctoral education, coupled with a shrinking sort of academic workforce in many places across the globe, The traditional route of doing a PhD and going into academia is not one that's followed now. So only about 30 to 40% of our PhD graduates will end up in academic positions, and most will end up in very precarious positions. Only a minor percentage will get into the tenured track or permanent faculty. Alongside this, employers were reporting a lack of skills in some of the PhD graduates in terms of transferable skills. And moreover, PhD graduates themselves were reporting feeling underprepared. So with this in mind, we set off to really explore that career preparedness by comparing US and New Zealand graduates. And there were ended up being three objectives. The first one really was about, did those PhD graduates develop a holistic set of graduate attributes, these sort of outcomes from their doctoral study, the skill sets and qualities that they developed during study, and how were they applied in the workplace? So what were they developing, and were they being well prepared for the workplace? And the second main aim was really exploring the reflections of PhD graduates regarding support for career development during study. So did they feel they were getting well prepared for career transitions? And then later on, after we had the data, actually, something interesting we spotted in the data were around the work areas that PhD graduates were going into and how happy they were in those positions and what factors were influencing their happiness. So although we didn't set out really to focus on this, we saw an opportunity there to do a little side study into the work happiness. So I'm going to report on each of these three objectives because each is associated with one of our key publications. Firstly, a bit about research design. So it was a comparative study between the US and New Zealand. There were three universities, the University of Otago and then two of the Californian universities. For ethical reasons, I can't name who they were. So we're just going to call them USU1 and USU2. So we did a survey and we were looking at cohorts from 2011-12 and 2016-17. That was to avoid crossover with the studies that the Council of Graduate Schools were doing. And then we were looking at science and humanities, arts and social science disciplines because we didn't really want to capture those with more vocational pathways that might have occurred, for example, from engineering type graduates. We also then did interviews with 21 graduates, so 12 from the US and 9 from New Zealand. And the data are quite old. I was there visiting in 2018. So it has taken quite a long time to get through the analyses of the quite rich data that we managed to collect. In terms of the demographics of survey respondents, alumni research is notoriously difficult because it's hard getting hold of people and getting that response. So we emailed just over 700 people. We got 136 more or less full complete survey responses, so that's 19%. So those low response rates are fairly typical of alumni research. We can see we had quite a good spread across those two broad disciplinary areas, slightly more in the sciences field, 55% compared to the HAS was 45%. As is typical with survey research, we had more women, 54% than men responding. And the survey sample was dominated by domestic candidates. Certainly in the US, they were mainly domestic, whereas at Otago, we have a policy here to encourage international PhDs. They pay domestic fees, so we're very attractive for internationals. So about half of our PhDs here tend to be international, so we had a high rate there. Okay, let's dive into the first study, which was looking at these graduate attributes. And the analyses were undertaken with colleagues here from Otago, Kim Brown and Claire Cameron. Firstly, what do we mean by graduate attributes? So Janine Senekal and colleagues from South Africa had done quite a bit of research on this more recently, and they put out there that doctoral graduate attributes are the qualities, skills and competencies that graduates possess, having completed their doctorate degree. And they suggested these domains, including knowledge. Research, it was interesting, they focused on skills, but not the research management side of it. And then you can see the other domains there, which we might expect for someone having gone through a PhD program. Certainly, more attention has been occurring in recent years around the last one here, this active citizenship. And I was fortunate to go to the Hanover conference in 2019, where it was focusing on the future of doctoral education. And they came out with a set of proclamations from that event. And one of them embedded this notion that we want to instill social and ethical responsibility in doctoral candidates, and as well as a desire to stand up for their own ideas and to take them forward for the benefit of society. So this idea of citizenship is something that's really come onto the radar more recently for doctoral education. And if we unpack that a little more, we can see here that global citizenship is another term similar to active citizenship. So if we looked at what Senecal was saying on the left-hand side of the diagram, they were saying that really doctoral graduates should be aware of injustice and inequality and have a social justice-oriented disposition. On the other side is some work that I've done in the past, drawing on O'Brien, and this was in a geography context, actually. And for that geography context, we looked at digital literacy, so being able to communicate using a wide range of media, the cultural literacy or intelligence, where you're able to work with other cultures with empathy, tolerance, respect, and the socio-communicative literacy, which is being able to negotiate across different cultural differences and so forth. And then in some work I did years ago for a geography paper, I said we should also add into that environmental or sustainability literacy. So collectively, these can make up that quality of sort of global citizenship attributes. So what do we do in this survey? We actually drew on a set of graduate attributes that was largely derived from a UK-based postgraduate research experience survey. So many of these would be duplicated from there, but we did have a few others that in our particular context here at Otago, we were interested in the ethical issues, the global perspective, cultural understanding, and environmental literacy. So they were some particular attributes we had in our university at the time. And in the survey, we were asking the PhD graduates to what extent they felt their PhD had encouraged development of each of those during their study, and to what extent they felt they had applied each of those following their study when they were out in the workplace. So it was on a 5-point Likert scale, with 1 not at all too strongly developed or applied. So let's see what we found. So this is a radar plot. In the middle, if it was down here in the middle, it wouldn't be at all developed, whereas if it's at 5, it would be strongly developed. So you can see the range of the attributes around the outside, and this is the average rating of the development of those graduate attributes across these 3 universities. Now, the thing that struck me first when we plotted this was actually there's quite a lot of synergy. They're pretty similar across the 3 universities, except in this area of some of those more effective attributes. And particularly USU1 was scoring quite lowly on cultural understanding and global perspective and environmental literacy. The other thing that struck me, which is a good thing, that we are developing researchers through these PhDs, so research skills are right up there, judgment, solving problems, academic rigour, they are all rated highly by the students for development during study. Kind of a surprise, though, was the extent to which teamwork is not really as strongly developed. And maybe not a surprise, we know that sometimes those PhDs can be an isolating journey, particularly in humanities disciplines. But in science, I had expected more. But it turns out that even though people are working in labs, they may not know how to work in teams, how to manage conflict, how to lead teams. So they were some of the comments that would come through in the survey and in the interviews. Oral communication was also down a little bit too, especially for 2 of the universities, but better at USU1. Self-confidence has a bit of a dive here, especially at USU1. I think we're dealing with a population here of PhD candidates and graduates who, in that top achieving cohort, they tend to suffer from the imposter syndrome. It's rife. So I think the self-confidence, I wasn't surprised really to see that there. All right, what about where did they go? So for the 120 who gave us their employment outcomes, we can see here that most of them were going into fixed-term academic jobs. I suppose I'll start off with good news here. 94% are employed, so high employment rate, but actually less than half of them are in permanent employment. So mostly in temporary. So certainly for the fixed-term academic, we can see that about a third of them were in these sorts of roles. That includes postdoctoral fellows, teaching only or teaching focused roles or research focused roles. Then still on this side of the diagrams tends to be the academic jobs. So we can see, yes, about quite a chunk had made it into tenure track academic positions. And then a smaller chunk had made it into tenured academic or permanent faculty positions. A few, actually, I think it's only about 3, were in these academic professional positions. So these are things like learning advisors within universities or career advisors or research management type roles. A few also went into teaching. Then we had about 18% in government and 18% in the private sector for profit, and then a few sitting in the private sector not for profit. So now we looked at the average ratings of the application of those graduate attributes in the workplace. So despite being in a range of workplaces, again, we can see real similarities from these graduates and how they're rating the application of most of these graduate attributes. So, most of them are very highly applied in the workplace. And really, we just see the variation again around some of those effective attributes. So we delved more into some particular areas of these attributes. And one of those interests I had was around this global citizenship attribute, the idea that this should be given more importance in doctoral programs. So here we have Marie from one of the US universities saying, it depends on the program. Obviously, there are important things. I agree with that. But really, the purpose of my PhD is to become an expert in particle physics, not something else. Then we have Simon, who's saying, well, it's firmly in place, almost university to begin with. It's a generational thing. Among millennials, that desire is already there, and it's not something that needs to be taught. And then kind of in the middle, I guess, is Marty saying, actually, it needs to be systematized a little better for these conversations to help grow each other, as opposed to consume the consciousness of the department. When asked around how transferable those skill sets were and whether they were preparing them for their jobs, Simon, who's a research analyst in government now, said, I can't think of a single thing that I didn't already get preparation for in terms of just job skills that were very transferable. And Kimmy, who's in New Zealand, she got a lecturing position, saying, it's a thinking game, how we see the world and how we prepare ourselves to see the world from others' views. No matter if you're in academia, in consultancy or in private, the qualification does serve a purpose. It's just how you transfer the skills being learned to different aspects in life. So certainly for these two, they're seeing it as transferable, as did many. But there is a but, and the but can be seen in this next diagram. So this is where we compare the average ratings of the development and the application across all the universities. And apart from the sort of research skills and academic rigor and analytical skills, we can see there are some quite big gaps there. And this is sort of contributing to that feeling, I think, that they're not necessarily that well prepared to make that transition into the workforce. So we certainly saw when we asked them about their perceptions of the adequacy of professional development and career development, they said, well, there's good opportunities for research skills. Interestingly, oral communication came up as one, despite them not being that confident necessarily in their oral communication skills. And teaching development, most of them thought they had good opportunities for that. But on the flip side, they had insufficient opportunities for this range of attributes. Teamwork. Now, some of these came out of interviews, not from the survey. So things like project management came strongly out of the interviews, and networking as well, leadership development, entrepreneurship, and commercialisation of research. So this really points to the need for better support in terms of those research and development programs that we provide for our doctoral candidates. All right, the second paper was around perceptions of career support. So we saw just in that last slide that they thought actually they needed more of this. For this one, we used the theoretical lens from Sampson et al. Of cognitive information processing theory. So this theory assumes that career choices involve cognition, emotions, and behaviours, and that effective career decision-making includes both having the knowledge and the decision-making process for thinking about that knowledge. So we can see down here is this knowledge about themselves and about careers. Here's this decision-making cycle, which is communication, analysis, synthesis, valuing, and execution. And quite a bit of research had been done up in this part of the cycle, but really we wanted to tone in down the bottom to find out what knowledge did they have about themselves and about career options. So for this, to look at this question, we were really honing in on the qualitative data, so those 21 interviews. And I'm just going to share some of the themes from the interviews with some examples of quotes. So the first thing here is responsibility for career development. And Veronica here is saying the main responsibility falls on the candidate, because ultimately it's their future. But of course, a department should play a role in trying to help. So it's sort of the shared responsibility. Secondly was the lack of consideration of career options. So Mark is saying there's so much on a PhD student's plate. It's kind of the last thing on their mind, which is maybe why it would be good for departments to mandate that stuff or have a curriculum set aside so that there's at least some structure for learning in that regard. So wanting something concrete actually in the curriculum. There were some concerns, particularly from USU too, some quite bitter graduates actually, when they were reflecting on their time. So they perceived a lack of concern by the university regarding career prospects. So Marty thought they'd been lied to. They were aiming for a faculty position, and 3 years into their study, they were told there's no way that'll ever happen. And Alice similarly felt it almost seems like it does a disservice to students when you're teaching them the art of this trade when there aren't many jobs to go around. So certainly for these two, and there were some others, were unaware that it was going to be really difficult to get into that desired faculty position, and they really weren't finding out about that until quite some time into their study. The other thing that came out was a perceived lack of support for careers outside academia. So look at this quote from Marty. It was as if I told them I had cancer leaving academia. It was like they were so weirded up. I lost all my friends. No one wanted to talk to me anymore. They would say things like, you're leaving. Oh, you failed. And similarly, Wendy noticed that this is a New Zealand university, she was embarrassed to admit it. I was worried they would reduce their investment in me and that I might not even finish the PhD if I started saying things like, I think I'm out of here once I graduate. So this is really interesting, I think, because academia has been likened to a cult. And in fact, there's a whole literature called the Quit Lit, which is about the difficulty of leaving academia and the shameful feelings and the guiltiness and the failure. I think we've really got to challenge that culture and make sure that we embrace careers, no matter where they are, that it's not just successful if you get an academic career. The other couple of themes that came up, there was one around values influencing career choices. So this is Simon saying, he was in the US military in an analyst position. So going into policy jobs, the world needs that expertise, making a real difference. And that excited him. We discussed transferable nature earlier, and then the other thing we noticed was really low engagement with career services. So nearly all those interviewed had not engaged with career services, yet in hindsight, all wished they had, and many thought it should be mandatory and actually embedded in the program. So we put all our sort of findings together into this conceptual diagram, if you like, looking at actions that candidates, supervisors, departments and institutions can take to foster career development. So at the centre here, we've got the PhD student who needs to be reflexive, proactive and open-minded. And things that the institution can do, they should be transparent about those graduate outcomes. They should actually require a personal development plan with annual monitoring of progress, something that gets the candidates to think about what skills and attributes do they need, not only for the research, but for those who are going into career transitions to help with that career transition. They need to also promote career services. Many of the ones we interviewed thought career services were just for undergrads and didn't even realise that there was a service there for the postgraduates, because all the institutions had that. And provide opportunities through research and development programs and outreach and internships, and encouraging those to enhance those transferable skills. In the department, there needs to be really careful terminology for careers, not academic and non-academic or beyond academia. Somehow we should just be talking about careers, no matter what they are, so that we are not really privileging academic careers. Certainly at one of the universities, some of the departments that we had students from were saying that the departments only posted successful outcomes from their graduates if they were going into academic roles. Those that had gone into government or business opportunities weren't necessarily being advertised or celebrated within the department. Then for supervisors, some things here too for them to do around having honest conversations about academic career prospects, so it's not coming as a surprise. And also the reality of the job, the good and the bad. They should be encouraging conversations about professional and career development, not acting as career counsellors themselves, because they've got specialists they can refer them to for that, but making sure they do make their candidates aware of that specialist support. They should also encourage professional development activities, especially experiential learning. So those outreach and volunteering can be extremely valuable for developing those global citizenship skills. And it was really disappointing to hear some candidates saying, I had to sneak around behind my supervisor's back to go and do that outreach because they thought it would be a distraction from my work. We should be encouraging that. Okay, and the last paper was around happiness and jobs. So in this one, we were looking at relevant survey questions, the employment sector, the employment title, weekly hours of employment, the employment contract, and the rating of happiness at work from 1 very happy to 5 very unhappy. And they had some free-form comments to explain their rating. So for this one here, remember 1's good. So the lower is the better here. So if we look across these average ratings of happiness, we can see that actually the ones that were very happy were the academic professionals. Maybe they've hit a sweet spot in terms of using their skills, but having that work-life balance. But it's only 3, so we can't make too much of those data. We can see that those who got into permanent faculty positions were also up there in terms of the happiness rating, and as were those in government sector and private sector, they were pretty happy too. I guess the least happy were the teachers, and those in some of the private sector, not-for-profit, and the academic fixed term and tenure track, not quite as happy, but overall pretty happy. Importantly, we found no significant difference in happiness between those in careers inside and outside academia. So that was really good. And what disturbed me in some of the interviews was graduates reporting they were surprised to be happy in government. It shouldn't be a surprise. They can be happy wherever. And then, but we did note that those in permanent roles were happier. We found no difference in happiness between the 2 cohorts we looked at, and nor the differences in happiness between those from HASS and science disciplines or the University of Study. If we just look at a word cloud from their freeform comments around positive aspects, you can have a look there to see what it is they're picking up on. Certainly colleagues, interesting, difference, develop, enjoyment, salary, contribution. And then we contrast that with some of the negative aspects they shared. Big one there, non-permanent. So if they were in those insecure, precarious positions, that was a very negative aspect. Workload, salary, career goals, maybe they're not in things they want to be in, the uncertainty, again, related to some of those precarious positions. So we drilled down to look at academic positions and those beyond academia. And so for the academic positions, the work fulfillment here included factors such as interest, enjoyment, passion, challenge, the importance of the work and the impact. Whereas the work environment is things like workload, salary, benefits. Relational aspects, which comes up in some of these, are around the leadership and the collegiality and culture, and support and development opportunities around sort of research funding, collaborative opportunities. So we can see sometimes these things can be either positive or negative. Certainly for the tenured faculty, the work fulfillment was a big plus, and work environment, though, might have been negative depending on that leadership and that culture or workload. Tenure track, a lot of things were seen as positive there, but some of those you'll see relational and work environment also could be flipped into negative. The academic fixed term were the only ones who were more on balance, more negative than positive. So we had far more negative comments, and mostly that was this work security, just the lack of benefit, the lack of knowing that that job was ongoing, and also possibly for many of them, a lack of benefits and health security and everything. The academic professional were pretty positive in general, no negative things coming through there. And then if we look at those beyond academia, surprisingly happy, government and public sector, it was interesting. In here, something that came through quite strongly was really enjoying stimulating environments and the opportunity to make an impact. That came through strongly in the data. And also matched to skill sets. So they were finding that actually the skills developed during doctoral study were really of use and valued in that workplace. But for some of them, they were still on precarious contracts, so that came through as a negative. And for some of them, there were other things like visa issues that were difficult. Teachers were the only other category with more negative, just there are only 3 of them, than positive. And that was really, they love working with students, but really the bureaucracy was seen as something they didn't really enjoy. Okay, so a synthesis across those case studies. Were they career ready? Well, there was a high employment rate, and they were satisfied and about their support for developing as a researcher. But we found they had really limited self and career options knowledge. So they didn't necessarily know about their skill sets or what career options were available. And they wanted some better support for transferable skills and attributes as well as career development. They were generally happy with their jobs. There was no difference between those inside and outside academia, but those in permanent roles were happier. And the main factors we found that influenced work happiness were having a supportive work environment, work that was enjoyable and congruent with their interests, and a match between the job, their skill set, and expectations. But overall, the takeaway message for me in my role as supporting research development was that actually better support is needed. Now, I've been talking for a while, and we can just pause here for 5 minutes or so just to touch on if there were any questions coming up through chat about that research, any questions related to the research.
I'll just quickly check Q&A box to see if we have any questions. Yeah, we've got one question. Do you think the responsibility of showing how PhDs can contribute to global citizenship should lie more on the institutes or the supervisors?
Oh, that's a really good question. Well, I think it needs to be, if this is something that the institution, the university values, then it should be, in a sense, coming from the top. So if it's something that is in the set of, if you have sets of graduate attributes, and that's a question in itself, we certainly do here. But if you have graduate attributes at an institutional level, looking for those signals and expectations around global citizenship. So is it something that the institution values? And if so, I think supervisors should be supporting candidates to be aware of those sets of attributes, because actually many aren't. I've done other work in graduate attributes where students actually have no idea what the institutional ones are. So part of our role as supervisors, and I still supervise, is to make sure students know about those skill sets that they should be developing during their doctoral study, and helping them to identify opportunities where they might develop global citizenship. So yes, I think there is a role for supervisors to encourage seeking those professional development opportunities.
Thank you, Rachel. Another question. Do you have enough data to comment on major differences in these metrics between international graduates versus domestic graduates? For example, there are differences in access to public services, culture, etc. Do you think they affect the responses to your surveys and interviews?
Oh, that's a great question. And I don't think we do have the data for that, actually. I'm about to embark on another study in an international team looking more specifically at international PhD graduates, where hopefully we'd get at some of those outcomes. I mean, it's very interesting. I'm not sure about the US case, but here in New Zealand, where we do have so many international graduates, a lot of them will want to stay here after they've finished their PhD. Some will be going back to jobs, they're upskilling and maybe going back to jobs in Southeast Asia or Africa, but many will want to try and stay in New Zealand. But on the flip side, the domestic graduates from here often, as soon as they graduate, want to go overseas. So it's quite an interesting exchange going on. But no, we don't have, I'm sorry, we don't have the data there to really comment in any depth on that. Okay, any other?
All the questions we've got.
Okay, that's right. Well, I'll carry on and we can come back to other questions at the end. We should have a little time. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on research impact, which is something that's becoming more important for us as researchers, I think, to think about. So when as I said, when I finished my Fulbright study and I gave the report to Fulbright, and while I was at the Centre for Studies in Higher Education, I actually wrote up a paper there, an occasional paper for them. But that was all. It took several years to actually get through the analysis of that data. I think I came back, we were undergoing some big restructuring at the university, then COVID hit, so it did take some time. But some of the very practical outcomes from this are me overseeing the development of a new set of doctoral graduate attributes. So here at Otago, we used to just rely on the same set of attributes for undergraduates for doctoral candidates, but I knew that doctoral candidates needed to do a better job thinking about the skill sets that they were developing. So we've got these a host of sort of domains, if you like, research and specialist knowledge at the middle, but we go through higher order thinking, communication, interpersonal skills, personal resourcefulness. Cultural intelligence is a really important one for us in New Zealand with the Treaty of Waitangi and expectations to engage fully with Māori, plus our place in the Pacific. So we have specific attributes here around both Māori and Pacific knowledge and some sort of basic language at least. And then global citizenship is there as well. So I was involved in developing those attributes. We're yet to see these fully embedded, but this is aspirational, I guess. And then more recently, I was just working with the Australian Council of Graduate Research. They had a working group coming up with a national framework for Australia around research development framework of graduate attributes. So some work there. The thing that I'm probably most proud of is a new requirement here at the University of Otago for personal development plans for all PhD candidates. So we've recently got approval through our Senate to have a PhD induction course. It's an online course. And as part of that, they have to develop a personal development plan. And this is now annually monitored. So we do progress reports, formal progress reports, at least every year. And as part of that reporting process, we'll have a check-in on these personal development plans. The other thing that has come out of this is career readiness courses. So these were co-developed with my colleague Yvonne Gort, who's our career advisor for postgraduates. And initially we did one course, which is included the self-discovery and the career options. So you might be thinking, oh, I'm not sure why that went up. Sorry about that. Go back. So really, it was a long course, about 20 hours, which we split into 4. So this coincides with that cognitive information processing idea of this base knowledge that you need, and then you can take strategies. So because the course was a bit longer, we actually split it into 4 self-paced courses and to get better engagement. So it's a mix of video, text, and infographics, and we actually use ChatGPT as a tutor and a career advisor. And so it's getting some really good feedback. And we're hoping those shorter courses that lead to digital badges will make it a bit more appealing. The other thing that came out of it, together with Anne McLaughlin from Berkeley, was the Higher Education International Work Group. So this was a joint group between our higher education departments, and it was a really wonderful opportunity to bring our graduate students and staff together to hear about each other's research. So that went for a few years. Unfortunately, it sort of stopped, I guess, sometime last year. My old department, higher education, was sort of reinvented in more of a professional teaching oriented type unit. So the research program has not been carried on there. There were a host of other publications for me too. So I've just finished earlier this year a chapter, What Are You Supervising For?, which covers similar material to here actually. And then a number of other papers around that career development course, where one of our candidates went through it and did a study of her pathway through that and learning about careers. When I was at Berkeley, I did this Reforming Doctoral Education, There Is a Better Way, and this is closely related to this paper, the PhD, Is It Out of Alignment? Really questioning, have we got it right? So we know there are these breadth of doctoral outcomes, and the teaching methods have been slowly changing in terms of those research and development programs to develop a host of transferable skills. But the problem is our assessment is still quite narrowly focused on a thesis and some sort of oral examination or a defence. So this one was really questioning that. And that led to this sort of idea here that maybe there should be personal pathways through and perhaps portfolios for enhancing PhD programs. So alongside these are a number of keynotes and invited talks to people in Australia, the UK, part of a Cambridge University online debate around futures of doctoral education, and talking at a conference in Stellenbosch, South Africa, about enhancing PhD programs. And sort of in an ongoing platform of research, we now have a new research project with colleagues, Professors Diane Ruffiu, who's the Dean here in our Graduate Research School, and Professor Tracy Riley, who's the Dean at Massey University. So we are looking at whether there's any appetite for change to rethink our focus on a thesis and an oral. So that's something we're currently doing. But I think the most important for me is the impact on PhD candidates. And I'll just share this quote from a recent PhD candidate who was going through our induction course. So really just her reflecting on that module of around the personal development. So I can actually see now that this is making a difference. They are going to be much more actively thinking about their career development. Okay, so just to wrap up, really just a few words now on reflecting on my Fulbright experience. It really was a wonderful opportunity for work, meeting people and leisure. So through work and beyond, we met some amazing people, made some great friends, and we had some incredible side trips, such as down the California coast or to the Grand Canyon. And it was an academic turbocharge. So even though it didn't work out quite as expected, it was a really privileged time just to be working on this research and extending networks and looking for new opportunities. And I guess one of the key things is that you do need to be flexible, adaptable, and proactive. So, you know, it was unexpected that that research group wasn't there, but we made the best. I made the best of it, and there was a group of visiting scholars that we organised ourselves, and we put on seminars and so forth. And so we really, it worked out to be a very beneficial time despite that. But I think it did need some proactivity around that and adaptability. So happy to have more questions, but I do just want to really acknowledge the support of Fulbright to do this. It's a wonderful organisation, fabulous funding to allow us to get overseas and make these connections and do this research. Also, just wanted to thank Susanna Ortega from the Council of Graduate Schools, John Douglas and Anne McLaughlin, especially from the Centre for Studies in Higher Education at Berkeley, and the graduate research schools in the UC universities where I did the research, and also Marisi Narad, who was the Washington researcher who didn't make it to, well, her group didn't make it to Berkeley, but she came to visit me while I was there, and we've had ongoing contact ever since. Yeah, so that's the end of the presentation. If there are any other questions at this stage, I'm happy to have any other questions about it.
Thank you so much. Rachel, I'll check the Q&A box to see if we have any questions. Right. Thanks, Rachel. Very interesting. Do you think responses changed depending on the length of time since participants have finished their PhDs?
No, so we did have those two cohorts, and we looked for, so for some aspects, we looked for significant differences between responses in the different cohorts. And for some measures, there weren't differences. I think probably the employment outcomes did reflect a difference because those who had graduated in the earlier cohort were more likely to be in those tenure track positions or in faculty or permanent positions. So yes, from the job outcome perspective. And it'll be interesting. I think since I've done this research, now I'm not sure what's been happening in the US universities, but certainly in my own university, we've got much more emphasis on research and development programs. So I'd hope in the future, if we were to look at the perceived adequacy of support of some of those opportunities, we would see an improvement there, that they are learning more about some of those transferable and professional skills. But yeah, that will be future study. Yeah.
Wonderful. But I don't think we have any other questions, but to wrap it up, if there is one piece of advice you would give to current PhD students thinking about their future careers, what would it be?
So it would be that even if it's not required by your institution to actually do a personal development plan. So there are many free ones online. So in the US, there's a great one called My IDP, Individual Development Plan. And that's free, and there's ones in Europe as well. There's a whole range of them available. I would say start a personal development plan, and that will really get you thinking about your future. If you're planning on academia, because we actually know that still the majority of students in PhD programs would like to get into academia. So have a plan B. So if you're wanting academia, by all means, try and maximise those opportunities, but have a plan B and look at it as a successful plan B, not just something else. So try not to focus on their academic pathway. There are a wonderful range of opportunities out there, and you're getting a fantastic skill set during your time studying.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Rachel. Thank you for sharing your work with us so generously. Would you like to finish with karakia?
Sure, thank you. And again, thank you for the opportunity. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te aia, te araha me te maratou, te hei moriora.
Yeah. Well, thank you. The recording of this webinar will be shared. We'll upload that on our YouTube channel. Ngā mihi nui, and we hope to see you at a future Fulbright Good Works webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are joining us from. Thank you, and see you soon.
Kia ora.